going to start off today just talking a little bit about the state of the U.S. economy and trends that we're seeing. We have been talking in Finance Committee, and the last several quarters, we've been talking about growth in Kansas City's revenue, but slowing growth. And we are not alone in that trend. In fact, most major cities across the country, due to high interest rates, housing costs, unemployment, we're seeing a slowdown of revenue growth across the country. I'm highlighting here some other cities, and this is on page 6 of your presentation. This is some of our peer cities across the country, as well as some large cities. Kansas City is not alone by slowing revenue growth, but also the increasing pressures we have on expenditures. Mayor Lucas, in his State of the City today, talked about Kansas City and its strong financial position related to our fund balance. That is not only because the strength of the economy coming out of COVID, but also decisions made by this city council on prioritizing fund balance reserve, your fiscal policies for sustainability, but also your focus and taking the time every year to look at a 5-year financial forecast for Kansas City. It allows you to adapt promptly for policy decisions, to really make changes when we need to in times of an economic downturn. Because of the position we're in with Kansas City, we are in a position better poised for a slowdown than many of our peer cities. You'll see here examples where some other cities are already starting layoffs, service level cuts, as well as hard hiring freezes. We have challenges with this year's budget. We will talk about that. And we will also talk about tools that this council has been directing us towards to help address this structural balance. So with that, I will jump ahead and talk about Kansas City's 26 submitted budget. And it is available online today at kcmo.gov/budget. And you all will receive next Thursday, we're actually presenting the budget a week early this year. You will see next week paper copies delivered to your office. But the budget is available online right now for you to review, as well as any residents. The budget's broken down in several major areas. It is a large document. I think this year we might exceed 800 pages. If you want to focus on highlights, if anyone's watching, want to focus on the highlights in Kansas City's budget, I would encourage you to look at 2 sections, the transmittal letter and the budget overview. They talk about major and significant changes from the current adopted budget to the submitted budget ahead. The budget is structured by city council priorities. So this is your citywide business plan. How do you build a plan to action? And it's about resource allocation. This council defined in your citywide business plan your goals of inclusive growth and development, finance and governance, housing and healthy communities, public safety, and infrastructure and accessibility. With that is not just goals. They're actually action items that your city manager set down with your department directors to define what actionable strategies are we going to do to achieve these goals in our citywide business plan. So a bit about the structure of the submitted budget. It's broken down by 2 categories. And these are governmental accounting practices. The first is governmental activities, and the second is business type activities. Our business type activities are user fee supported. So for us in Kansas City, that's water services and aviation funds. The governmental activities, that includes general fund, which is our least restrictive of our funds in Kansas City, but it's also supporting some of our greatest services to our community insofar as public safety, recycling and trash. But governmental activities also include fee-supported, our special revenue funds. So that's like our park sales tax fund, where the ballot language, voters approved a specific fee or sales tax for a specific purpose. So Kansas City's submitted budget for fiscal year 26 is a $2.5 billion budget. Breaking that down by governmental activities, It is $1.7 million. That represents an 8.2% increase from our current adopted budget. And business type activities is $841.8 million, representing an 8.1% increase from the current budget. So Kansas City is lucky that it has a diverse revenue stream. And if you look at Kansas City's budget, we often talk about a third, a third, a third. A third of our budget, roughly, for Kansas City is our general fund. That is our least restrictive of use. A third of Kansas City's budget is special revenue funds, capital funds, and debt funds. So those are more restrictive. That's the example of the park sales tax, where voters approved a sales tax for that specific purpose. And then our final third in our pie chart here in red is business type activities representing our aviation, water, and sewer and stormwater funds. So overall, we are seeing growth in revenue across the city, and there are a number of slices and dices of different views in Kansas City's budget. But this view on page 13 is revenue by fund, and overall, Kansas City is seeing growth in revenue. Across the whole city, it's 8.9% growth. But that comes with a caution, because we are seeing slowing growth. So you'll see here on slide 14, all of our major types of revenue and the growth assumptions included in Kansas City's budget, and that's based on just current trends we're seeing. This next slide on page 15 really illustrates since the recovery of COVID. We had a very strong economy. All major revenue types really hit record highs for Kansas City. But then you see this line going flat. Most of the lines are going flat. We're seeing growth, but not the growth we've seen in recent years. Overall, the expenditures for Kansas City's budget, and this is also broken down like we saw the revenue in a third, a third, a third across our budget categories. Expenditures for Kansas City are $2.5 billion. And the next several slides breaks that down by different views. You can see that by fund. You can see that by council goal. And then slide 19 talks about the growth by council goal, and we'll talk in more detail ahead. You heard some of the highlights in the Mayor's State of the City address. We'll talk about major changes by goal in the budget. But I do want to talk a little bit about the assumptions included in the budget and how this budget is built. First off, it reaches our highest wage increase, a priority of this city manager to make sure we never get behind to the point this council had to approve probably record high compensation increases in the last 4 years. So this budget assumes a 4% increase for non-represented employees, and then represented employees, that would be our collective bargaining agreements with the fire union, with Local 500. We follow all terms and increases in those agreements. I will note that Local 3808 negotiations are ongoing, so we don't have final amounts. So we have had to include some general assumptions for Local 3808. This budget does include a vacancy rate of 10%. So your current adopted budget includes a vacancy rate of 7%. Most of our departments are currently sitting with a vacancy rate of 18%. So we do believe just through normal turnover, most of our major departments will be able to manage this vacancy rate without any impact to service levels. The exception to that is fire has a vacancy rate of 3%, and that's due to the collective bargaining agreement terms. Pension is funded based on actuarial required contributions, so we're meeting all of our pension requirements across the city. And there is a health care increase to all of our plans at approximately 5%. So when we went into this budget, we asked departments, because we do need to manage growth, we have a structural imbalance. We asked departments to work with, outside of these 4% wage increases, to work within around a CPI, which was 2.8. So we expect contracts to increase around the consumer price index for the region. And that is what we asked departments to try to start working within in their budget submission. This next view is a breakdown of Kansas City's budget by category. Probably no surprise, the majority of our budget is spent on people. We're a service industry. So governmental activities is the general fund, all of our special revenue activity funds. You'll see here in the medium blue, the bulk of our budget is spent on personnel associated costs. Business type, that same view is to the right on this page. So I'll jump in to the slide that walks through your submitted budget for governmental activities at the goal and department level. So you'll see the largest category of spending in Kansas City's governmental activity budget is public safety, ensuring we have a safe community. That is followed by infrastructure and accessibility, and you'll see a breakdown by each and every category. The next slide talks about the changes in the current adopted budget to your submitted budget. So using this example, I'm just picking the top department on here. How to read this is our fire department's budget is increasing $45.7 million. That is in compliance with the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. That is the majority of that increase there. And you can see this represented for each and every department. I'll talk about the highlights ahead by council goal, and then this is broken out further in the transmittal letter in the budget. And of course, we'll be talking over the next couple of months in Finance Committee, diving into great detail here. So the category of the general fund itself. So the general fund revenues in the submitted budget are $790.7 million. Our largest category of revenue in the general fund is earnings tax at 44.4%. And our next category is utility tax at 13.5%, followed by local use tax. Slide 26 just breaks down the percentage change from year to year. Overall, our major revenue sources, again, have growth built into this budget. The general fund, we're assuming revenue will grow 8.8%. And our general fund expenditures are submitted at $809 million. The majority of the general fund, 72.8%, is supporting public safety. That is the fire department, the police department, municipal court, and the correctional services division. And then you'll see our next category of finance and governance at 13.3%, and housing and healthy communities at 12.1%. The view on page 28 walks through the changes as a percentage and dollar amount by council goal. You'll see here growth in each of the council goals. Obviously, the majority of our budget here is wages and personnel costs, so when those go up, each of our goals will go up. But we'll talk about strategic investments ahead in each of these council goals. The next few is expenditures by category. And then I want to bring your attention today specifically to page 31. We have been talking about the structural balance for Kansas City. We are sitting at a position above our 3-month emergency reserve. The submitted budget assumes in the general fund a drawdown of $64.6 million. And we are anticipating we will end with this budget still above our 3-month reserve. So I'm going to just briefly touch on some highlights. The mayor covered many of these in a State of the City. These are certainly not all inclusive, but I think these are just some important highlights and investments that this budget makes for a safe and clean Kansas and prosperous Kansas City. So starting with housing and healthy communities, this budget adds $1.4 million for illegal dumping enforcement. It adds $1 million for emergency rental assistance. That was previously supported by a grant. Those grant funds have exhausted. So given the need of the community, this budget assumes that cost in the general fund. This budget expands emergency shelter beyond the extreme weather by adding $1 million in the budget. This budget also adds $1.8 million for Zero KC, the city's initiative to end homelessness. The budget also adds $2 million for World Legacy Cup projects. And then also, as the mayor mentioned, the historic investment in affordable housing. This budget is year 3 of 4, adding $12.5 million through the GEO bond for a total of investment of $50 million in the Housing Trust Fund. In the area of public safety, the city's largest expense of governmental activities, we are prioritizing wage and benefit increases for the fire department and the police department to ensure we can recruit, retain quality public service safety officers. It adds $1 million to support security needs in entertainment districts. And this budget is also, I just will note, as many of you all know, we are looking at long-term plans for inmate detention as well. Infrastructure and accessibility, just a few highlights here. We're adding $3 million in this budget for Vision Zero, a total of $8 million of funding to create safer streets for Kansas City. And then also we're adding $4 million throughout the city for the continued LED street light conversion. Just highlighting a couple areas in inclusive growth and development. This budget adds $2.5 million for our convention facilities for maintenance and event support there. And then in the area of finance and governance, I won't go into each of these, but it does add $10.2 million for our enterprise resource planning software implementation. So that is the structure or the technology supporting our HR and all of our financial systems for the city. It's at its end of life, and this budget prepares and invests in its replacement. This budget also adds $10.8 million for facility improvements in City Hall, as well as adds $1.4 million for a new HR investigations division to ensure that different employee matters throughout the city are investigated consistently across the city. So the general fund balance, this is a view many of you are familiar with, yes. You will see our submitted budget estimates our general fund will still end with this drawdown at $238.8 million. That's sitting above our 3-month emergency reserve. And then you see the forward trend here. We are sitting with a structural imbalance, but this is something we have been planning for in the years, and we are have been implementing over this last year priority-based budgeting across the city. So our imbalance and fiscal sustainability to continue to deliver services needs to remain a priority. We have to slow expenditure growth. There will be tough decisions ahead, but I think priority-based budgeting, this council agreed, where the city in the past has looked at a structural imbalance and everyone got an equal cut across the city. And priority-based budgeting looks at this differently. And I will turn over to Micah to talk specifically about the work that's been done for priority-based budgeting and how that will help serve us ahead address this issue.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Officer Morrison, and good afternoon, Mayor Lucas, members, and City Manager Platt, Micah Intermel with GovStrategist. You've seen many of the slides that I'm going to walk through before, so we're going to move through them quickly. But as this process is new for Kansas City, we did want to highlight some key points and include them both for your reference in the coming weeks as you do your hard work of digging into this proposal, but also for posterity's sake when years from now folks are looking at these slides wondering what happened back in 2025. Priority-based budgeting is a best practice for public budgeting, not according to me or Mr. Fabian or Officer Morrison, but according to the Government Finance Officers Association and International City County Management Association, the national experts that really set a lot of the standards that Kansas City, much to its credit, follows today. As the slide says, it's collaborative and evidence-based. It seeks to match resources to forward-looking priorities as established through the citywide business plan and informed by resident engagement, rather than merely following historical allocations. So that's seems like a slight but important distinction from traditional budgeting approaches. And it's a shift in the way that Kansas City is preparing its budget. And that shift, the last point on the slide references, was mandated by council resolution in May of 2022. And of course, this year we're looking at general fund programs only. So zooming into Kansas City's application of priority-based budgeting, the important takeaways from this slide are really threefold. First, the priority-based budgeting process, unlike those traditional incremental budget processes, really creates a systemic bond between the citywide business plan, which is of course the city's 4-year strategic plan and rolling 5-year financial plans, marries that directly to the budget development and adoption process. In Kansas City, both of those core management processes, the citywide business plan and annual budget, are rooted in resident engagement that you see lives in the top left of the slide. And that resident engagement is continually monitored in Kansas City through the resident satisfaction survey. The third point that I'll make is that the council priorities that you see on this slide manifest differently depending on where the city is in its 4-year electoral cycle. So that first year includes the establishment of the city goals and objectives. The remaining 3 years include really being responsive and reestablishing focus within those 4-year goals and objectives as conditions on the ground change. So not rewriting the goals and objectives wholesale, but helping to refocus as to what's truly important today. So this is a very streamlined and simplified slide of really the nuts and bolts of doing the work of priority-based budgeting. Every program and service that touches the general fund this year was inventoried and ranked on the series of factors that you see on the screen. Most of the weighting in priority-based budgeting goes to the alignment point at top left, which is really how well are these activities aligned with the city goals and objectives articulated in the citywide business plan. That is not to say the other factors are not important. They are, and they speak to the really crucial components of high quality and effective administration of public programs, and that is why they are also a part of this ranking. And these rankings help inform resource allocation discussions. Mr. Fabian will go into that in more detail, but, and you'll hear me repeat myself, these rankings do not decide resource allocation, you all do. So budgeting is a team sport. As Budget Officer Morrison mentioned at her outset of her remarks, the team that sat behind us that she leads is not solely responsible for all of the great work that's being shared with you today. The entire enterprise is, and that includes, as you see on the screen, everybody ranging from citizens to you all as elected officials, departments, and City Manager Platt. And since it's Super Bowl season in Kansas City, which being from Minneapolis, Minnesota, that's something that's a little bit foreign to me, I wanted to go ahead and use an analogy here. I would argue that this budget team, they're not the quarterback, they're actually the offensive line. They're setting the stage for success of the other actors that have led at different points throughout this process, which I suppose makes Budget Officer Morrison Creed Humphrey in this example, which I would argue it's good to have a Pro Bowl caliber player in both roles. It's been an interdisciplinary and collaborative effort and will continue to be, as you'll hear Mr. Fabian speak to later on. So this is an example of the collaborative work that we've done to date. We started 2 years ago with online and in-person community engagement. As you see, the photo in the center screen was taken in the Northland at one of those engagement sessions. The goal-setting retreat that Mayor Lucas hosted at the Kansas City Museum and a subsequent strategy setting retreat that City Manager Platt hosted at the Starlight Theater. We continued then last year with lots of meetings with departments, which we appreciate all of their time and engagement, as well as interactive in-person sessions such as the scoring peer review represented in the photo at top right at the Bruce R. Watkins Center. We've intentionally been across the city, both metaphorically and literally, with this work. The last point on process that I have to share is this. Fundamentally, public budgeting boils down to a pretty simple formula. It starts with a collection of data. To that data, a group is tasked with providing analysis. And that data and analysis combine to create information for managerial and elected policymakers. Decision makers apply their judgment to that information, and that is how the decisions are made. So priority-based budgeting doesn't change that framework, but as the slide says, it's really going to, or it has and will continue to supercharge the data that kicks off this process and creates a new paradigm of highly informed decision-making that I think you all really enjoy. So next we'll speak to the progress we've made as a result of the work that I've just detailed. This slide's really just a distillation of what you've seen on those previous slides, and the key takeaway here is we have done a lot of work, again, with a lot of folks to get to this point of supporting your alignment of the city's resources to its priorities. And it is a moment to celebrate because it is a significant journey of change when you're looking at changing the way a $2.5 billion organization functions. And so in my mind, that's always a good thing to call out and appreciate that work. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mr. Fabian to give more depth to what we've learned through our work and discuss the next steps.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you, Officer Morrison. Thank you, Mayor Lucas. Thank you, City Manager Platt. And thank you, members of the council. My name is Chris Fabian, and I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about where you are in priority-based budgeting as we apply a priority-based budgeting lens, not only to the submitted budget, but to resource optimization opportunities moving forward. As Micah has mentioned, the submitted budget comes to you today having been informed and inspired by the priority-based budgeting process, which means that resource allocation recommendations have been made in alignment to the greatest extent possible to the citywide business plan. Those are the priorities in priority-based budgeting. But as Budget Officer Morrison alluded to, and the mayor as well in the State of the City address, with the structural financial condition ahead of you, it's most prudent to be looking out for your long-term fiscal sustainability. And therein lies the second most important value proposition of priority-based budgeting is how do we begin to use this information to avoid the types of dramatic decisions that many of United States cities are facing that Budget Officer Morrison highlighted earlier in her presentation, and instead with your foresight and with your planning and with time on your side and data on your side to begin to apply a priority-based budgeting lens to see where we can have some resource reallocation and new revenue generating options. And that's what you see on this particular slide. With a priority-based budgeting lens, we can look at all of the programs across every department and see programs of higher impact and greatest alignment. We can see programs of high cost versus low cost. We can see programs that are mandated and required of you to provide as opposed to programs that are not required and at the purview of you as decision makers. And with a priority-based budgeting lens, we can begin to understand where you have opportunities to take action and optimize your resources. With every program evaluated with this lens, and because you are now a priority-based budgeting city, which is epic, you are a leader in terms of financial management in this country, we can take every program that you have identified, that the departments have spent a great deal of time to identify, and cross-reference with other peer organizations to understand, short of knee-jerk reactions to cut the budget across the board, where can we find natural efficiencies and alternative approaches to service delivery, partnership opportunities, or new revenue generation. in this case on this slide from tenant advocacy and seeing how organizations from the city of Fort Worth, Texas, to the city of Seattle, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so many others have been able to take action on these programs, find efficiencies, continue to deliver services of the greatest degree of impact with less resources, or at least by leveraging partners and new revenue opportunities. With all of your programs, over 100 programs identified in priority-based budgeting, we've developed the very first draft of what we call a program insight report, an ROI report. In simpler language, it's one of the so what moments of priority-based budgeting. Upon going through all of this analysis and providing this data, where do we head with it? All of your programs now being characterized and analyzed on alignment with the citywide business plan and all of those other basic program attributes, as Micah had demonstrated, we can organize where all of your budget goes by program in order to pattern match and bring back these specific recommendations, which actually has just happened, the very first draft of all of the new revenue generation opportunities, as well as the expenditure side, where we have opportunities to optimize the budget. The blueprint we follow, as I describe, new revenue opportunities or alternative revenue opportunities, as well as resource optimization on the expense side, follows. As we heard in the State of the City address, you are on the left-hand side of this blueprint. The great city of Kansas City has new programs to tackle, new challenges that have emerged that you, as visionaries on this council, and of course your mayor and city manager, are approaching and trying to fulfill the promise for your community. And those priorities require resources. And so with the priority-based budgeting data in our hands, every program now with opportunities for resource reallocation and new revenue generation, we have specific recommendations on what are other governments doing? What are other best practices for each and every program we provide as it pertains to sourcing a program differently, providing the same level of service but more efficiently, with less resources, that is, service level trade-offs that make sense for this community, as well as new revenue generation that could come from fees and charges, that could come from partnerships, it could come from insourcing, it could come from grant funding. And all of this still leaves on the table opportunities, of course, to consider at some point taxes, rates, and other means necessary. But with this data, we now can do our due diligence appropriately to spend within our means and still approach the future with readily available resources and not be constrained by scarcity. So in conclusion, as I wrap up, I wanted to give you a sense of where we are heading at this very moment and in the coming months with the data that you have just put together. For all of the 100 plus programs and services from all of the departments across the general fund, each program now has specific case study examples. We call them program insights, pattern matched across the entirety of the priority-based budgeting database with specific guidance and recommendations for your programs relative to other best practices. We call them program insights. The insights come with recommendations that will still, as Micah mentioned, these are options for consideration, many of which have policy implications to determine if this is the best direction. They are backed up by case study examples from other organizations. We go to the next slide, assisted animation, so that we can ensure that they're not just interesting ideas, but we can go to these other local governments and see how did they do it? What were the steps that they took? And how could this be applied in the city of Kansas City? And that is a tremendous asset at your disposal. And Budget Officer Morrison mentioned this towards the beginning. Yes, you have challenges before you, but now you have data and tools on your side because of the great work that you've done in priority-based budgeting and where we'll head next in this process.
So I'll jump in here and talk about the opportunities ahead, really, for Kansas City with priority-based budgeting. And these are the next steps. You will be considering this budget ahead. And as the city manager received each decision package, those were scored. Your budget amendments will come through the same process as well this year. The next steps of this process is to take the insight report, and we have a lead from, this will be in collaboration with the city manager's office. But we have to address the $65 million in the room. So we have targets set, and these insight reports will be through a cross-collaboration team. And it's not just cuts. It is the conversation of when other cities look at a program like tenant advocacy, there might be fee added to certain parts of the community. So there will be this cross-collaboration team working with the city manager's office and departments, looking at each program, what other cities are doing as we try to address this budget structural imbalance for Kansas City. With that, of course, is actionable measures, reporting regular report outs to the city council on our progress and how departments are doing. So we aren't bringing another 60 million this time next year. We've got a lot of progress to make over this next summer. So those are our next steps ahead with this great work done by Chris Fabian and his team. So I want to talk about the budget process and the next step. So you do have your submitted budget, City Manager Platt's submitted budget. It is available online. We will be in committee, spending lots of quality time together over the next 2 months, presenting every week into more detail on the departments, on the goals, what's changing. So with that, this council can pass the budget or there can be amendment to the submitted budget. Budget Amendment A is for administrative changes. I would love to have a perfect budget, a $2.5 billion budget. We always find something we missed. Amendment A is for administrative changes. Amendment B, those will be items coming from mayor, this city council. So those are programmatic requests or changes that you want in the submitted budget to be adopted. We have asked this year, Councilwoman Boo did set forth a calendar, and those amendments, we have a deadline of March 5th because every budget amendment will be scored through priority-based budgeting. And we're asking that you submit those in writing to the city manager, Finance Director Queen, and myself, as well as the Finance Chair Boo. On Monday, you will be receiving more information from Chris and Micah specific to if you want to score your own budget amendments. What does that matrix look like? We want a transparent process. We want you to see exactly the experience departments went through so you can score and see how this process works directly. You will also hear from each and every one of your departments. So we have 3 opportunities ahead, starting Thursday, February 13th, from 8:30 to 12:30. I know it's a significant block in time, but it's how you're going to hear the details on Kansas City's budget, and we'll allow plenty of time for you to ask those questions directly to those departments that you may have. So we have 3 dates, Thursday, February 13th, Wednesday, February 26th, and Thursday, February 27th. Those meetings will be here in council chambers on the 26th floor in City Hall. The legislative process is, we have submitted the budget. It's required by the second regular city council meeting in February. There will be 3 opportunities for public engagement, and this city council has to pass by the 4th regular meeting in March the adopted budget. I think our target is a week early this year by March the 20th. There will be opportunities for public engagement. We have 3 opportunities throughout the city. One is starting Saturday, February the 15th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Greg Kleiss Community Center. Monday, February 24th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. at Woodneath Library. And then our 3rd opportunity will be Sunday, March 1st from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Avila University. If you do, we are offering language access for each of those meetings. If anyone wants to learn more or reserve language access, you can go to kcmo.gov/budget.